Preface. The old ones say that every knowledge worth keeping must first be paid for in blood. North of every prayer, where the wind smells of rust and cold ash, there stands a tree larger than memory. Its roots plunge through the lands of the dead. Its trunk props up the heavens. Its branches hang fate the way winter hangs dead birds from black boughs. Men have called it by many names. Poets call it the timber pillar of the cosmos. Sorcerers call it the gallows of the gods. Those who once stood beneath its shadow in the hour of the world's ending whispered only one word: Yggdrasil. This is not the tale of a chosen hero. It is the tale of a man who died in a world without gods and opened his eyes in the 9 realms just as destiny was beginning to chip and dull like an old axe edge. A man who learned to cut runes into wood, into bone, into stone, into flesh, and discovered that every line carved was a debt incurred. A man who believed he had been given power so that he might survive, only to discover that survival is not the same thing as being spared. Some stories end with dawn. This one ends with fire, with the horn that calls the last battle, with a name struck from the grain of the world. Chapter 1. The Man Who Woke in Snow. I remember my death less clearly than I would like. That is the first humiliation. People imagine that the final instant of a life will arrive full of impossible brightness, that everything a person has ever been will gather itself into one pure image before the thread breaks. My death in the old world possessed none of that grandeur. There was no battlefield, no confession, no noble farewell, only rain, the slick shine of a city road, headlights lunging through the dark like a white spear, and my body splitting under a pain shorter than a curse. Then darkness. Then cold. Not the sort of cold I had known in winter. This was colder than weather. It did not bite the skin. It slid through it and took hold of the bone, as though some invisible hand were touching each vertebra with a knife tip and asking whether I still meant to live. I opened my eyes. The sky above me belonged to no morning I had ever known. It was the color of metal spoiled by damp, and inside that grayness, thin green lights trembled like ghost fire behind a veil. Snow crusted my lashes, my mouth, the collar of clothes I did not remember putting on. I lay in a forest of black trunks, each tree scored with long winding cuts that looked less like cracks than like script. I pushed myself upright, and pain flashed through me as if I had been badly assembled from borrowed bones. My right hand plunged into the snow. Something burned. I jerked it back. There, in the center of my palm, was a mark. It was not a wound exactly, nor a tattoo. It looked as if something inside my flesh had taken a knife and written outward. 3 slanting strokes, harsh and angular. I had never seen the sign before, yet the instant I looked at it, I knew the sound attached to it. Kaun. The word fell into the snow, and the forest answered. A tree 10 paces away split with a report like cracking bone. Black sap ran from the fissure. Deep in the cut, a red flare trembled as if a buried coal had just been breathed on. I staggered backward and nearly went down. Footsteps rushed through the trees. I spun, seized a dead branch, and braced myself. Out of the white haze came a woman wrapped in wolfskin and old furs, a bone-tipped spear in her hand. She stopped when she saw I could stand. "Who are you?" she asked, in a language I had never learned and somehow understood. The question hit harder than the spear. Who was I? My name lay somewhere in my head, but under too much snow. I clawed for it and found only fragments. The smell of coffee, my mother's hand on my forehead when I was a child, a rented room full of stale heat, laughter I knew had once been mine. I swallowed. I don't know. She watched me without pity. She weighed me the way one weighs a knife found beside a corpse. Keep it or throw it away before it cuts the hand that lifts it. At last she lowered the spear. "Then you are something the snow has misplaced," she said. "Walk if you want to keep the life you've just found." I followed because something howled far off in the trees, low and old and wrong, and because I did not yet know how to stop obeying the living. She led me to a stockaded village crouched beneath a rise, all long houses, sharpened stakes, smoke, and hanging bone charms. The people who opened the gate did not like the look of me. They liked it even less when they saw the mark in my palm. "Rune," an old man whispered, and those nearest him stepped back. Fear has the same face in every world. Inside the longhouse, warmth hit me like another blow. Fire burned in the center pit. Meat strips hung from the rafters. Smoke and tallow and wet wool pressed against my senses until panic almost rose with the heat. An old woman sat by the hearth, shaving a sliver of bone with a knife. "Come here," she said. I knelt without knowing why. She took my hand and held it to the firelight. Her dim eyes studied the mark a long time. "You have died," she said. I gave a hollow laugh. I noticed. "No," she said, "in the deeper sense. Your blood and your smell do not belong to one another. You are a man who fell from one thread and was nailed into another." No one in the hall laughed. My mouth had gone dry. "Where am I?"
"Midgard," the spearwoman answered. "The world of men." The old woman spoke again before I could ask the next question. "And above Midgard hang other worlds on the same trunk, more than you would have believed in the life you lost. We call them the 9 realms." Names I had once known as fiction stirred inside me like something not yet ready to wake. "I am Sigrun," the old woman said. "If you live 3 days, I will tell you what that mark means. And if I don't, the cold may keep the secret." I slept that night on piled hides beneath a wall of shields, if what I did can be called sleep. I dreamed of a tree so vast the sky bent around its branches. I dreamed of a one-eyed man hanging from those branches by his own will, blood running from his side in black ropes. I dreamed of something beneath the roots, opening a lidless eye. Each time I woke, the rune in my palm was burning. On the second night, the dead came. They came without barking dogs or warning cries. The gate groaned, men shouted, a horn bellowed. The longhouse exploded into motion. The spearwoman, Yrsa, I learned then, kicked the furs off me and shoved an axe into my hands. Outside, snow and firelight tangled in the yard. 3 things had already come over the palisade. They moved like men whose joints had forgotten grace, stiff in one motion, too quick in the next. Their flesh was dark, swollen, water-rotted, frozen. One dragged half a chain from its ankle. Another still wore a broken helm. Their eyes were flat and old and hateful. "Draugr," Yrsa snapped. One threw a villager hard enough to break him against a fence post. Another seized a woman by the hair. The third turned toward the longhouse, where children were being shoved deeper into the shadows. Everything inside me recoiled. Everything in my palm surged forward. Sigrun's voice cut through the noise, not with fear, with shape. Shape. Meaning. Rune. The draugr with the broken chain came for me. I stumbled backward, my hand split on a splintered post, blood running hot across the mark. The rune answered like a living ember. I snatched up the broken wood, dragged the sign into it with my bleeding thumb, and spoke the sound I had learned in the snow. Kaun. The wood ignited. Not ordinary fire, it sprang red and hungry, as if the world had remembered flame in the wrong place. I thrust it forward on terror alone. The blaze touched the draugr's chest and ran through it. It threw back its head with a sound like air splitting. Yrsa's spear took another through the throat. Sigrun flung ash at the third, and silver light burst across its face. Then everything became heat, shouting, and the stink of opened graves. One of the dead reached me even while burning and clamped its hands around my throat. The mark in my palm blazed so hard I saw white. Something more than flame moved through me, not language yet, but the edge of it. When it ended, the draugr were ash and blackened bone in the snow. I fell to my knees. The villagers stared at me as if I had not saved them, but uncovered something they had prayed never to see. Yrsa stood above me, breath steaming. "You didn't just survive," she said. "No," Sigrun murmured. "He paid." Only then did I understand what she meant. I tried to remember my mother's face. I could not. I knew I had had a mother. I knew she had once touched my forehead and sung to me. But the face that should have come with that knowledge had been cut cleanly out of me. I vomited into the snow. At dawn, the dead were ash, the yard was black-stained, and the village no longer looked at me as if I were a guest.
Chapter 2. The Winter Without Summer. After the night the draugr burned, the village no longer treated me as a guest. A guest may be invited in, fed, questioned, and sent away again when the weather softens. I became something else, a tool people feared to use and yet kept close, like a knife that has tasted blood for the first time. Children were forbidden to come near me. The men stopped mocking my clumsy hands. Women left food beside the wall where I slept and went away before I could thank them. Only Yrsa did not change. She remained hard-eyed, sharp-tongued, and impossible to fool. At dawn, she dragged me out into the yard and put work into my hands. I learned to split wood, mend fence, salt meat, watch weather, and move through a storm without losing the line of the trail. During the day, I worked like any other man. At night, Sigrun taught me runes. She did not teach like a scholar, she taught like a grave-digger. One mark at a time, one sound, one rule, one prohibition. She made me draw symbols in charcoal, then cut them into scrap wood, then into bone, then trace them on my own skin with a blunt needle until my hand learned where every angle belonged. Runes are not ornaments, she said. They are cuts in the world made in the shape of meaning. If you do not know what a sign asks, the world will answer however it pleases. She taught me algis, warding, refusal, the shape of protection. Not invulnerability, she warned me after cuffing me hard enough to make me blink. Protection, redirection, shelter bought at cost. By then, the winter had already begun to rot the edges of the world. Streams froze overnight. Trappers returned empty-handed. Men from neighboring steadings came with thin faces and murderous eyes, already quarreling over whose children would eat and whose would not. One day, two brothers nearly cut each other open over a sack of barley in the center of the yard. "Fimbulwinter," Sigrun said that night, "the great winter before the end. Men break before the world does." I wanted to laugh at her. Instead, I remembered the city I had come from, glass towers, hospitals, traffic, electronic voices, and realized that men had always broken first, even there. Here, the gods merely made it official. The more I learned, the more the runes took from me. Not always faces, not always cleanly. Sometimes I woke knowing something was missing, but unable to name it. The tune of a song, the color of the walls in my old room, the exact shape of my own face in the mirror. A joke that used to make me laugh. A rune could drink memory the way fire drinks resin. Sigrun never lied about that. If knowledge does not come from your blood, it comes from what your blood once carried. Midwinter fell with a storm so hard the world vanished outside the stockade. We spent 2 days buried in wind and white. On the third, when the drifts were finally low enough to cut through, Yrsa and I found a child half dead by the palisade. He could not have been more than 7. His furs were too thin, his lips were blue, one arm had frozen half numb beneath him. No one in the village knew him. We carried him inside. "There isn't enough warmth left in him," Sigrun said after laying a hand to his chest. "The cold got in too deep." I looked at the child and felt something raw twist under my ribs, a fragment of another small hand, another life, another tenderness I could no longer place. "Tell me what to carve." Sigrun's gaze cut toward me. "No." "He'll die. So may someone else." I heard her. I understood her. I carved anyway. I cut algis into a strip of ash wood and set kaun beneath it, binding heat to warding. By the time I finished, my palm was bleeding freely. The wood drank the blood. I laid it on the child's chest and spoke both names. Heat moved. Not through the room, through him. His body arched once sharply. Frost steamed from his skin. Color crawled back into his lips. He coughed water and mucus and began to cry. It should have been a mercy. Behind me, old Toki gave a strangled cough and dropped the bowl in his hands. Black fluid spilled across the rushes. He drowned on dry ground before sunset, coughing black clots as his wife screamed curses at gods and ghosts alike. The child lived. His name, when he had enough strength to tell it to us, was Einar.
For an hour I hated him. Then I hated myself for hating him. Then I understood why harsh gods breed harsh worlds, because every mercy has weight, and the weight must land somewhere. That night I told Sigrun I would never use a rune again. "You mean you wish there were a way to stay clean," she said. "There isn't, not anymore. You have already been written into this winter." "What does that even mean?" She looked at the mark in my palm. "It means the horn has not sounded yet, but the world has begun listening for it." 3 nights later, I heard the first horn. The note came from very far away, thin with distance, yet wrong in the marrow. Not a call to hunt, not a call to feast, a sound made to reach the dead and the living alike. No one in the village moved while it lasted. When it faded, Sigrun only looked at me and said, "You cannot stay here." Yrsa stood in the doorway with her spear in both hands. She did not argue. Chapter 3. The Stone Archive. Sigrun sent us east by north to a place beneath the mountains where old letters were stored like weapons. Yrsa came with me because she trusted me less than the road. That was how she put it. We walked for days through steep country where the trees grew sparse and rock rose through the snow like old walls shouldering up through a battlefield. At night, in the shelter of boulders, Yrsa listened while I spoke haltingly of the world I had lost. Trains, electric lights, crowds, cheap food, loneliness stacked in apartment towers high above streets full of strangers. "No kings?" she asked once. "Not the kind you're thinking of. And no gods?" "Not any that answered." She stared into the fire.
That sounds quieter than this place." It wasn't. "No," she said, "I suppose if men have no gods to blame, they simply become more inventive with their cruelty." The archive lay behind a black cleft in a mountainside. The passage within sloped downward into warmth and a light that was neither torchlight nor day. Runes burned faintly inside metal cages on the walls. The deeper we went, the more the air smelled of iron, charcoal, damp stone, and old dust. The people waiting below were not human, though they were close enough to make the difference uncomfortable. Broad-shouldered, shorter than most men, hands built for hammer and chisel, eyes bright as if the fire had got into them and decided to stay. The first of them to see us swore. His beard was black with threads of gray and soot. One side of his brow was scarred by an old burn. He looked permanently offended by the existence of everyone around him. "Ursa," he growled, "you bring weather and trouble at once." "This is Brokar," Ursa told me. "If he insults you, assume he is in a fair mood." Brokar's gaze dropped to my hand. The moment he saw the rune, his face hardened. "That thing should not be walking." "I said the same," Ursa replied. "Yet here it is." He jerked his head. "Come, if you bleed on anything old, I'll beat the blood back out of you." He showed me no reverence. Strangely, that made the place easier to endure. Under Brokar, I learned what Sigrun had only begun to teach. A rune was not a spell to be flung blindly at the world. It was language, shape, structure, meaning cut into matter. A ward carved into rotten wood was a lie. A severing rune cut poorly into iron might shatter the blade that bore it. Every sign had edge, and edge was grammar. He taught me naudis, need, pressure, the shape of necessity, and Isa, stillness, suspension, cold that does not merely freeze but commands motion to stop. He made me cut and recut the same signs until my fingers cramped. If the angle was wrong by a hair, I began again. "Meaning is edge," he said. "Blunt edge, blunt fate." Far beneath the workshops, he showed us the tally vault. At first, I thought the long columns on the stone slabs were records of names. Then I saw what was being counted. Nails. Fingernails. Toenails. Tallies of the dead. My skin crawled. "Naglfar," Ursa whispered. Brokar grunted. "The old stories are not stories here. Every corpse buried carelessly, every nail left on a dead man, every funeral botched through hunger or haste, all of it feeds a thing people prefer to call symbolic. It isn't." On the far wall, half hidden in soot, I saw another pattern cut into the stone. Not a tally this time, a locking geometry built around a sign that my palm burned at once. "What is that?" I asked. Brokar took up a lamp and held it close. Not a gift, not a blessing, a lock rune, a seal. The air seemed to narrow. Ursa looked from the wall to my hand. "Speak plainly."
Brokar's jaw tightened. Something beneath the roots was shut once with this pattern. Not a door exactly, more a hinge in the order of things. If the same sign walks in flesh, then someone did not save this man from death. Someone made him portable. For what? For an age ending. I wanted to leave the vault at once. Not because of the dwarves, not because of the nail tallies, because there are places where language becomes more solid than blood, and the idea that my hand might be carrying a movable lock for the end of the world made every breath feel stolen. The world did not let me keep that fear private for long. Before we reached the upper halls, the archive shook.
Every rune in the walls and floor flared in one pulse and went dark. Hollow bells rang through the stone. Dwarves burst from workshops with hammers, axes, and glowing rings of carved iron. "The West Gate!" Brocker shouted. My palm knew before my mind did. The rune burned as if red iron had been pressed under the skin. Something was pulling on it. We ran. At the western passage, a circular stone lock stood split open. White light spilled through it, too clean, too bright, nothing mortal. Asgardian light. The first man through wore bright mail and a white cloak. He was gold-haired, beautiful in the dead way a polished blade is beautiful, and the instant his eyes dropped to my hand, I knew he was not surprised to find me there. "There," he said, "bring him living." What followed was all close metal and shouting. Dwarves slammed hammers into white-shielded men. Ursa went under one spear and came up inside its reach with her knife. Brocker snapped an iron ring around another invader's arm and pinned him screaming to a pillar. Then the gold-haired captain was on me. He caught my forearm and closed his hand over the rune in my palm. Agony went through me, and inside that agony came images, a hall in Asgard under winter light, and one-eyed old king speaking over a root carved with runes, scribes and smiths writing something foreign into a wound. "You are the hinge," the captain said. "Good, then all of this was not wasted." Ursa drove a spearhead under his arm and tore him off me. Brocker struck the wall runes with a chisel, and the passage convulsed. "Move!" he roared. So we ran, not upward, but deeper.
Chapter 4. The Truth Beneath the Root. Broker drove us through maintenance passages and forgotten stone veins until the archive's alarms became a distant metallic thunder. At last, the tunnels opened into a cavern so vast our lights could not find the roof. There, a root hung over an abyss. It was broader than a bridge, ridged like sinew, blackened with ancient bark. Runes moved through it in dim pulses, as though sap and script had become the same thing. "A root of Yggdrasil," Yrsa said under her breath. A woman waited on the far side of the cavern. She was a giant, not monstrous, merely large, spare, and grave in the manner of old stone. Her hair had gone white in thick braids. Frost lay in the folds of her cloak. Her eyes were the color of old ice over deep water. "If I had meant you harm," she said, "you would not have reached the root." Broca swore at her as one curses a relative. So they knew one another. Her name was Hrid. She looked only once at my face and then fixed on the mark in my palm. "The cut walks," she said. "Then the All-Father has grown more desperate than we feared." I stepped toward her. "Tell me what I am." "No," she said. "I will tell you what was done." She touched the root beside her. "There are stories men tell afterward, and there are structures that make those stories possible. The gods of Asgard learned long ago that prophecy is not merely spoken. It is cut, repeated, forced into memory, until even the roots remember it. When the signs of Ragnarok sharpened, Odin sought a thing outside the weave, a soul with no old bond here, a man from another world. Me? You, or rather the wound made from you." She did not soften it. "They did not bring you here for a kindness. They wrote you in as a gloss, a living annotation in the margin of the end. The mark in your hand is a lock rune, a seal meant for a hinge beneath the roots, a turning between the world that dies and the world that must follow." Yrsa's hand tightened on her spear. "For what purpose?" "Odin does not seek to stop the end," Yrsa said. "He seeks to keep his hand on its throat. If the hinge is mastered, the gods of Asgard may control what survives the ruin, or prevent true renewal altogether." My mouth had gone cold. "And every time I used a rune?" "You deepened the cut. You made the annotation truer. Each use takes memory, because memory is anchor. Each use writes you farther away from the man you were and farther into the function they gave you. Toki, the displaced debt of fate. I shut my eyes. There it was, Toki drowning in his own lungs because I had refused to let a child freeze. Mercy weighed and shifted. Protection redirected death. Nothing came free.
Brokkr folded his arms into his sleeves. There's worse. Every forced change tears at the old order. Graves open wrong. Oaths fail. Bodies go untended. Naglfar grows faster. The world becomes careless with its dead. I stared at my hands. I had not only bought survival with memory, I had been helping build the ship of the dead. Yrsa broke the silence first. Then kill him now. End it. I looked at her. She met my gaze without blinking. Not cruel, simply unwilling to lie about the shape of the question. Hrid answered. If the lock is broken carelessly, the old world still dies, but the turning after may fail. Ash without renewal, cold without rebirth, a cosmos too wounded to make another spring. That was the moment I understood I had not asked for freedom and been denied it. I had asked for truth and been given a task. The horn sounded again, even beneath the mountain, closer this time. Hrid closed her eyes briefly. There is no more time for hiding. She led us deeper still, to a wall of ice and dark stone carved over with overlapping prophecies. At first I saw only old runes, then I began to see structure, additions over older lines, corrections, inserted sequences. There, among them, was the sign for my palm. A new cut in an old doom. A living margin note, Brokkr muttered. A hinge, Hrid corrected. A lock written into flesh. I laughed then, a raw and joyless sound. So I truly am only a comment someone carved in the side of the end of the world? Hrid regarded me with that frost-deep gaze. Even a comment may alter the sentence. That night, Yrsa found me awake near the wall of prophecy. You're doing that thing again, she said. What thing? The one where you look as if the world would be improved if it killed you quickly. I almost smiled. Maybe it would. She crouched beside me. Don't offer yourself like a fool before you know the cost. I've seen too many men in love with the shape of their sacrifice. I'm not in love with anything. No? Her eyes were pale in the blue light. That must make this easier. There are moments when language offers many roads and cowardice chooses the quietest one. I said nothing. On the third day in Jotunheim, news came from the outer passes. The dead were moving openly. Great wolves ranged valleys where none had ranged before. The sea had begun to heap itself in black walls around something long and coiling. Naglfar had been sighted. The old order had tipped. That evening, Hrid told me the rest. The only way the turning can remain true is if the lock is opened from within, she said. At Vigrid, where the world's strain will be greatest, the final carving must be made by the flesh that bears the sign, on the root itself. I heard the question inside the answer. What does it cost? Your true name, your anchoring memory, perhaps your shape. The cut that made you can be undone only by cutting deeper. I thought of what the runes had already taken, my mother's face, pieces of my old life, songs, rooms, mirrors, everything small and ordinary that once proved I had belonged somewhere. If I do this, I asked quietly, will anyone remember me? No one answered at first. Then Yrsa said, I will try. That hurt more than certainty would have. Chapter 5. The Clock of Vigrid. The road toward Vigrid felt less like travel than like being fed through a joint in creation. The farther we went, the thinner the air became, the more metallic the wind tasted, and the more ordinary sounds vanished. No birds, no running water, only wind scraping stone like invisible saw teeth. Mountains loomed blue-white and black above us. Once I thought I was walking along the spine of some colossal corpse buried beneath the world. We met giants in the passes, not monsters out of tavern stories, but austere people shaped by older weather than ours. They looked at me not with hatred, but with recognition. "That is worse," Brokat muttered when I said so. It was. At a hidden hall within the ice, Hrid showed me a prophecy wall cut over and over by many hands. Not one doom, but revisions, corrections, reassertions. Fate argued with by knife and memory. There my mark appeared again, inserted where older lines ran from broken bonds to the march of the dead and finally to the battlefield of Vigrid. The gods had not merely used me, they had edited the end around me. When we left the ice hall, a small giant escort came with us, not out of trust, but because no road leading toward the death of an age should be walked with too few witnesses. The world worsened as we traveled. We passed a village with every door open and every house empty. Bowls still on tables, spoons frozen into abandoned stew. We crossed a valley where bodies hung from trees by ropes of hair and tendon, old dead stirred from graves by some blasphemous current in the world. Near a black lake, we hid under stone while a marching host of corpses passed in ranks, armor clattering under frost. Far off we saw the sea rear around a shape too long to be mistaken for anything mortal. Jormungandr. Elsewhere, from the torn weather to the west, came the howl of something vast enough to make even the clouds seem uncertain. Fenrir. At the last ridge before Vigrid, Hrid gave me a sliver of dark rootwood. For the first line, she said, the root itself will take blood after that. I turned the little piece of wood over in my hand. It seemed absurdly small for something meant to matter at the end of worlds. Ursa came to stand beside me. "When we reach the field," she said, "do not try to be brave the way songs tell men to be brave." "What way is that?" "The way that kills them before the useful part." I laughed softly. "And what if this is the useful part?" "Then be ugly about it. Live as long as you can. Make them pay for every step." Below us, Vigrid spread wide as judgment. Armies gathered in every direction. I saw Asgard for the first time and hated it immediately. They came in white and gold, in shining mail and faultless lines, banners clean even under a torn sky. If you looked only from a distance, they might have seemed holy. Closer, the illusion rotted. Behind the bright lines rolled engines built to maim. Bodies hung from wagons. Their beauty was discipline, sharpened into cruelty. Opposing them came the hosts that songs call monstrous, because songs are usually written by the people least willing to share grief with their enemies. Frost giants, fire giants, black hosts of the dead, wolves larger than halls, things with too many limbs or none at all.
Then the horn sounded, again and again from the side of Asgard, each note so bright and pitiless that my teeth hurt with it. "Heimdall," Hrid said. "The war that followed cannot be told properly, because proper telling belongs to safe rooms and civilized hours, not to the collapse of an age. I remember slices,
Thor's chariot breaking through sleet and corpse mud like a storm given wheels, hammer lifting and falling in arcs of white death. The world serpent coiling through sea and field alike, its body a horizon made of scales and poison. Surtur moving far off like a walking furnace, a sword in his hand that looked like a torn-out piece of the sun. Naglfar riding black water where no ship had any right to ride. The ground shuddering underfoot with the strain of things too old to die quietly. We kept to the flanks at first. Brokkr and the giants fought like people who had long ago accepted that dignity and survival are unrelated. Yrsa stayed beside me with infuriating stubbornness. Twice she dragged me out of charges I had not seen until spear points were almost inside my ribs. Then the Asgardians found us. Not a random sweep, hunters. The gold-haired captain from the archive was with them, one cheek bound in white cloth stained pink. Behind him rode men beneath a torn white banner. At their center sat an old man on a horse the color of grave smoke. One eye. Even if I had never seen him in dream, I would have known. Odin. He was not the noble father of tidy myth. He was lean, weathered, and terrible with attention. Power clung to him the way winter clings to stone, ancient, patient, and no longer interested in being merciful to small lives. When his gaze touched me, every rune in my body felt suddenly like a latch. "So," he said. His voice was quiet, yet the air around it seemed to sharpen. "The borrowed soul has reached its use." Yrsa stepped in front of me. "Then come take him." A smile crossed Odin's mouth. It was not kind. The white cloak struck in a wedge. Brokkr broke the first man's jaw with a hammer blow. A giant went down under 3 bright spears and dragged 2 riders with him. Yrsa's spear snapped against a shield. She did not hesitate, drew her knife, and went inside the gold-haired captain's reach like a wolf slipping under a gate. I cut Naudis into the rootwood strip and drove it into the mud before Odin's horse. Constraint, need, pressure. The ground lurched and clutched at hooves and ankles. 2 riders pitched sideways. Odin's horse reared but did not fall. The old god looked down at the carved wood and then back at me. "Still learning," he said. His spear moved. There was no speed to it, only inevitability. One heartbeat the spear was in his hand, the next it had crossed the space between us and driven through Hrid's chest. She looked at me over the shaft as if she had expected nothing kinder. "Root," she said. So I ran. Cowardice and obedience use the same legs. I ran because if I stopped to save her, I would die in the same patch of mud, and the hinge would never turn. That knowledge did not make the running clean. Yrsa tore free from her own fight and came after me. Chapter 6. A Song for the Man Without a Name. The exposed root thrust up from the battlefield, half buried in ice, ash, and corpses, black as old law. "This is it," I said, though saying so changed nothing. Only then did I see the blood on Yrsa. An arrow had gone through the flesh high in her thigh. Another cut had opened her side beneath the arm. Blood ran dark over her furs. "You're hurt." "I have been hurt before." She shoved me toward the root. "Cut." "If I begin, I know." "No," I said, "I don't think you do. Hrid said it takes the true name, the anchor. I may not come back from it in any way that matters." Yrsa looked at me with that fury she always wore when fear had become too sharp to hide. "Then don't waste the part that can still choose." Arrows hissed around us. One struck the root and smoked. Another scraped my shoulder. A third punched into Yrsa's leg and drove her to one knee. She snapped the shaft off with a curse and kept glaring at me as if pain had merely inconvenienced her. Behind us, the field was tearing itself apart. Somewhere far to the right, a great cry rose from the Asgard host and broke into screams. Somewhere else, thunder rolled in the wrong direction. The old songs were not ending one by one. They were all ending at once. I climbed the root. The bark was warm. That nearly undid me. Not wholly, not remote, warm, like something still alive beneath all the ash and blood. I braced myself and cut the first line with the dark rootwood. The mark in my palm exploded. Pain drove through me, but inside the pain came more than pain. Memory, voice, weather, blood. I cut the second line, the third. The pattern came not from study, but from recognition, as if the seal in my hand had always been waiting for the world to grow thin enough for its opposite to be remembered. Below me, men shouted, to stop me, to guard me, to kill me. I could not tell which voices belonged to whom anymore. The cuts in the bark would not hold without blood. I laid my palm over them. The root drank. Everything opened. I saw the road in rain where I had died. I saw my mother's face return for one clear, unbearable instant. I saw Sigrun at the hearth, Toki drowning on the floor, Einar coughing back into life, Broker bent over stone letters under forge light, Hrid among the prophecy cuts, Yrsa in the snow on the first day, deciding not to kill me. I saw, too, the place in Asgard where I had first been written wrong. Not brought, written. A hall of cold gold, a root diagram spread across black wood, Odin standing over it, while smiths and scribes cut foreignness into a wound and called it strategy. He had never saved me. He had merely found a thing that did not belong and decided to make use of its unbelonging. Rage steadied my hand better than reverence ever could have. I cut deeper.
The final rune was not one Broker had taught me, nor Sigrun, nor even Hrid. It was the answer to the seal, the inversion of captivity, the turning of lock to opening. To shape it properly, I had to offer the thing beneath all the losses, my true name. At last it rose through the storm of memory like something drowned coming up through black water. I knew it. I do not write it here. When I spoke it into the root, the world split. Light plunged downward first, through bark, through battlefield, through the hidden hinge beneath creation. Every rune on the root flared white gold, edged in blood red. The nearest Asgardians threw up shields and screamed anyway. The force that burst through them was not flame, nor lightning, nor any weapon a war god might claim. It was sequence restored. It was the world finally finishing a sentence someone had been trying to prevent. The root groaned. The whole tree seemed to strain at once. I lost hold, or perhaps I simply ceased to be made in a way that could continue holding. I remember flashes. Odin looking up, and for the first time in him, not command, but comprehension. A white banner disappearing under Surtur's fire. The sky opening wider. A wolf shape red to the jaw. Thor staggering from the serpent with poison already in his blood. Yrsa below the root, one hand pressed to her wound, staring up at me with such furious concentration that it felt like she meant to remember me by force if memory itself failed. Then, even those images began to go. I understood then that the price was not only death. The runes took my true name first, then the exact shape of my face, then the sound of my own voice to my own ears, then smaller things, crueler perhaps because of how ordinary they were. Wet asphalt after summer rain, a key turning in a cheap apartment lock, the taste of bad coffee, the rhythm of a song I had once known by heart, the warmth of a living city at midnight. Everything that anchored me to a former life, everything that said I had once belonged elsewhere. I held on to one thing as long as I could. Yrsa in the snow, lowering her spear. That went last.
When the light receded, the old world had already begun to die properly. Vigrid burned. But the burning was not only destruction, it was completion. The old order had been forced through its own narrow gate at last. Fire crossed the field. Ice broke. The sea withdrew screaming. Halls of the gods collapsed somewhere beyond sight into ash and weather. Beneath all of it, hidden below root and ruin, the hinge turned. I did not wake into the green world immediately, perhaps because I was no longer built to wake. What I know of afterward, I know only as though through wood grain. Rain fell. Ash settled. Snowmelt ran dark and then ran clear. The dead ceased moving with purpose and lay down where they had fallen. The few survivors crawled out of ruin, buried whom they could name, burned whom they could not, and began the slow labor of calling a world back from its mouth of ending. Ursa lived. She should not have, perhaps, but Broker dragged her from the field, half-conscious and cursing. She limped for the rest of her life. She rebuilt with the others. She buried the remembered dead and made pyres for the strangers. When the first green shoots rose months later through black earth, she looked at them as if they might still prove treacherous. She kept for many years a dark sliver of wood. No writing remained legible, only a scar that might have been the beginning of a letter or the ending of one. She did not know why she could not throw it away. Some nights, when wind moved through trees with the sound of old timber under strain, she would wake with grief so sharp that it made her sit up gasping, though she could not have named who was missing. Children were born in the years after. New halls were raised. New roads were named. Some old songs returned in changed forms. Others were never sung again. That is as it must be. The world after catastrophe is not innocent, it is merely open. And if, sometimes, a traveler in a green wood places a hand upon a black old trunk and feels for one fleeting instant a warmth beneath the bark, as if language itself was still there, listening, perhaps that too is only part of the price. Some stories end with dawn. This one earned it through fire.
Hey there! If you enjoy our audio content, don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with your friends. Most importantly, click subscribe and ring the bell to stay updated with everything Zuzu Audio. Support the channel and join our community today.